You son of a bitch, don't you dare! But it was already too late. Marcus Thorne, his face a grotesque mask of smug satisfaction, had already rammed the button with the force of a judge banging a gavel. The shredder whined to life, a mechanical predator tasting its prey. The check for $4.7 million, a life's work distilled onto a single slip of paper, was devoured. It dissolved into a cascade of pathetic, curling white ribbons. The fragments spit out onto the polished marble floor, scattering like the ashes of a cremated dream. A collective gasp, sharp and sudden, sliced through the opulent lobby of Sterling Trust Bank in downtown Los Angeles. A forest of smartphones, already discreetly recording, lifted higher, the lenses like 100 unblinking eyes bearing witness to the execution. On screens around the world, livestream viewer counts exploded, ticking upward with viral velocity. What this pompous asshole in his $1,000 suit doesn't know is going to utterly obliterate his entire world. And you have a front row seat. So, do me a favor, smash that like button and hit subscribe right now, because you are not going to want to miss a single delicious second of the justice that's coming. Marcus Thorne, senior branch manager and self-appointed guardian of financial purity, smirked. It was the greasy, self-congratulatory smirk of a small man convinced he had just performed an act of great heroism. He had exposed a fraud, vanquished a charlatan. He brushed a piece of paper lint from the sleeve of his tailored Zegna suit. "Problem solved," he declared, his voice a sharp, triumphant crack in the stunned silence. He looked around the lobby, seeking and receiving nods of approval from a few of the bank's wealthier-looking patrons. Across from him, Elias Vance stood as still as a statue carved from obsidian. He was a stark contrast to the bank's gilded interior, dressed in a faded black hoodie, worn-out Levi's, and a pair of scuffed Nike sneakers. His face was a placid lake, offering no clue to the tidal wave of fury churning in its depths. Moments earlier, his voice had been a desperate whip crack, pleading, then demanding. Yet now this unnerving calm, this profound stillness, was more unsettling to the gathering crowd than any scream of rage could ever be. The paper scraps, the ghost of his fortune brushed against the toes of his sneakers. His lips barely moved as he spoke again, his voice a low, resonant whisper that was nonetheless captured with perfect clarity by the dozen phones now aimed directly at his face. "You have no idea what you've just done." "20 minutes earlier, the world was a different place. 20 minutes earlier, Elias Vance had pushed through the heavy, ornate brass revolving doors of Sterling Trust Bank with the quiet, measured confidence of a man who owned every room he entered, even if no one else in the room knew it yet. This wasn't his first time stepping into this cathedral of commerce. He'd been here countless times for board meetings on the executive floors. But this was his first time ever entering through the front doors, as an ordinary man, an anonymous customer. And that was the entire point. Today was the culmination, the final brutal field test of a system he had spent 2 decades of his life meticulously building. Every policy, every hiring decision, every single line in the employee training manual, it had all led to this moment, to this test. He was the architect of the ship, and today he had disguised himself as a lowly passenger to see if the rot he suspected had truly taken hold below deck. The interior of the bank was designed to intimidate. It spoke of generational wealth and unshakable power. Colossal marble columns, veined with gray and gold, soared towards a cavernous, coffered ceiling painted with frescoes of historical commerce. The floors were polished black granite, so reflective they mirrored the galaxy of crystal chandeliers hanging like frozen explosions overhead. The air itself felt heavy, thick with the scent of expensive leather, old paper, and the faint, metallic tang of money. The bank's clientele moved through this space with a rehearsed, hushed reverence. Men in bespoke suits, women in designer dresses, their leather briefcases and Birkin bags serving as silent signifiers of their worth. Elias, in his hoodie and jeans, was a discordant note in this carefully composed symphony of wealth. He was a splash of gritty, urban reality on an immaculate, gilded canvas, and he felt the eyes on him immediately. Subtle glances that lingered a second too long, noses that tilted upward, ever so slightly. He was being catalogued, assessed, and dismissed in a matter of seconds. From behind her polished teller station, Isabella Rossi, a 24-year-old with meticulously highlighted blonde hair and a gaze as cold as the marble counter, tracked Elias's every move. Her surgically sharp blue eyes took in the worn sneakers, traveled up the faded denim, and paused on his face with a look of barely veiled disdain. She'd been working at this prestigious downtown branch for 2 years, a stepping stone, she hoped, to a career in wealth management. She had become an expert at categorizing people in an instant. She knew what kind of customers belonged here, and she knew, with absolute certainty, what kind of customers didn't. This man was a waste of her time. When Elias finally reached her window, Isabella made a point of not looking up. She continued typing on her keyboard, the rhythmic clacking filling the space between them. She let him stand there. 10 seconds. 20. A full 30 seconds of deliberate, calculated silence. It was a petty power play, a small cruelty designed to make him feel insignificant, unwelcome. It was long enough to communicate contempt, but not quite long enough for him to file a formal complaint. It was a game she played often. "What do you need?" she finally asked, her voice laced with a professional frostiness usually reserved for panhandlers and pigeons. She didn't make eye contact, her gaze fixed on her monitor. "I'd like to deposit this check," Elias replied. His voice was calm, even, betraying none of the frustration he felt. He reached into the pocket of his hoodie and withdrew a neatly folded piece of paper, handling it with the care one might reserve for a sacred text. Isabella took the check from him with 2 fingers, her reluctance palpable. She unfolded it with the caution of a bomb disposal expert, as if it might be contaminated with poverty. Her eyes scanned the paper. "Pay to the order of Elias Vance." Then they fell to the amount, $4,700,000. The universe seemed to stutter. For a heartbeat, Isabella forgot to breathe. The blood drained from her face, leaving her perfectly applied foundation looking like a pale, cracked mask. Her eyes, wide with shock, darted from the impossible number on the check to the impossible man standing before her, then back to the check, then back to the man. The 2 things did not compute. Her entire system of categorization, of understanding the world, had just suffered a catastrophic failure. I, she stammered, her voice suddenly a high, tight squeak. The practiced, cold professionalism vanished, replaced by raw panic. "I need to call my manager." She fumbled for the call button under her counter, her eyes locked on Elias's face. The disdain was gone, replaced by a new, more potent emotion. Suspicion. Deep, corrosive suspicion. It radiated from her in waves. It was no longer a hidden microaggression. It was a blaring neon sign that read, "Criminal." In less than a minute, Marcus Thorne materialized at her station. He moved through the bank like a shark, gliding toward a drop of blood in the water. He was a man in his late 40s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal Zegna suit that cost more than Isabella's car. His Italian leather shoes were polished to a mirror shine, his platinum cufflinks gleamed, and a Patek Philippe watch encircled his wrist like a manacle of success. Everything about him was designed to scream authority, wealth, and superiority. He snatched the check from Isabella's trembling hand, holding it up as if it were a piece of evidence at a crime scene. He examined it with the theatrical skepticism of a man who believed the world was filled with fools and liars, and he was the only one smart enough to see through their pathetic schemes. A cruel smirk curled his lips, a smirk that never came close to reaching his cold, steel-gray eyes. "You've got to be kidding me," Marcus said, his voice loud enough for the adjacent teller lines to hear. Heads turned. Conversations quieted. A few people, sensing drama, discreetly angled their phones in his direction. This was exactly what Marcus wanted. An audience. He held the check up to the bright overhead lights, squinting at it like a jeweler inspecting a fake diamond. His performance was for the benefit of the growing crowd. He was the protector of the vault, the vanquisher of the unworthy. "So tell me," Marcus said, his voice booming with the self-importance of a federal judge. "What precisely do you do for a living, Mr.?" He made a show of squinting at the name. "Vance, Elias Vance." "I'm a private investor," Elias replied, his voice still a maddeningly level sea of calm. The hostility radiating from Marcus was a physical force, but Elias stood against it, an unmovable rock. "An investor," Marcus repeated, letting out a short, barking laugh that was utterly devoid of humor. "Doing what exactly? Investing in lottery tickets? Where did this money come from? Do you have documentation, invoices, a contract? Anything to prove this isn't a piece of paper you printed in your mom's basement this morning?" Can you imagine the rage building up inside him? The sheer effort it must be taking to not just leap over that counter? How would you react in this situation? Let me know in the comments below, because I don't think I'd have his self-control. Elias, ignoring the insults, reached into the back pocket of his jeans and produced a well-worn leather wallet. It was a simple, unbranded thing, but from it, he withdrew his driver's license and a sleek, black credit card. The American Express Centurion card. The mythical Black Card, an object of legend for which one could not apply but had to be invited, and which required a documented history of spending hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of dollars per year. Marcus glanced at the card, but his brain, already so committed to its narrative of fraud, either didn't recognize it or chose to dismiss it as another part of the forgery. He fixated on the driver's license, examining the photo with an exaggerated thoroughness, comparing it to Elias's face as if he were a TSA agent confronting a suspected terrorist. "Elias Vance," he read aloud, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "Says here you live in Beverly Hills." He said Beverly Hills as if it were the most ludicrous lie he'd ever heard. Quite the address for a man who shops at Goodwill. "We're going to need to do some extensive verification for a transaction of this magnitude," Marcus announced, his voice projecting across the lobby. He still held the check, clutching it like a trophy. "I understand your procedures," Elias said, his patience a miracle of modern science. "I just ask that you follow them professionally and treat me with the same respect you'd show any other client." Meanwhile, Isabella, seeing her manager take control, felt a surge of validation. She had been right. This was a situation. This was exciting. She subtly propped her iPhone against her monitor and started an Instagram live stream. Her fingers flew across the screen as she typed a caption. "Crazy fraud attempt happening at my work. Baksha crime, Stranajor's bank life, Stranajor stay safe." Within moments, the viewer count began to climb. 50, 100, 250. The digital world was tuning in. The atmosphere in the bank had curdled. What had been a routine afternoon was now a public spectacle. The low hum of business had been replaced by a tense, anticipatory silence. More phones were out now, a small constellation of cameras capturing the unfolding drama from every angle. Elias glanced at his watch. 2:45 p.m. He had a board meeting scheduled for 3 and 3 p.m. a meeting that would decide the future of Sterling Trust Bank's entire customer service philosophy. 15 minutes. 15 minutes until every single person in this room and the thousands watching online would understand precisely who they were dealing with. "So, Mr. Vance," Marcus continued, enjoying his position at center stage, "you're telling me you have the time to just stand here while we investigate this? You're not in any particular hurry to cash out and vanish before the police get here?" The accusation was now explicit. The sting of it was sharp but familiar. Elias had felt it his whole life. The assumption of guilt, the presumption of poverty, the constant, wearying burden of having to prove he belonged. But today was different. Today he had invited the sting. He had willingly walked into the hornet's nest. "I can wait," Elias said quietly. "I have nowhere else I need to be." That was the final trigger. For Marcus, this calm defiance was the ultimate insult. How dare this man not crumble? How dare he not beg or run? Marcus Thorne slammed the check down on the marble counter. The sound was like a gunshot, echoing through the cavernous, silent lobby. He puffed out his chest, trying to make his average frame seem imposing, his face flushing a dangerous, blotchy red. When he spoke, his voice was a full-throated roar, a declaration of war for the entire bank to hear. "This is a forgery," he bellowed, his finger jabbing at the check. "A pathetic, counterfeit check. Someone like you," he spat the word out like poison, "could not possibly have legitimate access to this kind of money. It's impossible." The lobby fell utterly silent. Every transaction stopped. Every customer and employee was now a captive audience member in the Marcus Thorne show. Elias maintained his impossible composure, though a tiny muscle twitched in his jaw. "Sir, I would appreciate it if you would simply run the check through your standard verification system. I am more than willing to wait for proper authentication." "Absolutely not!" Marcus screamed, his voice rising into an almost hysterical shriek. "I will not waste another second of this bank's time and resources on this transparent, insulting fraud." Then, with a dramatic flourish, Marcus snatched the check off the counter. He turned and marched with righteous purpose toward a large industrial-grade paper shredder that stood near the customer service desk, like a squat, mechanical god of destruction. It was a beast of a machine, designed to devour entire stacks of documents in seconds. With theatrical deliberation, he plugged it in. The motor roared to life, a hungry, guttural growl of spinning metal teeth. The crowd murmured. Isabella zoomed in with her phone. "People like you," Marcus announced, turning to address both Elias and his wider audience in the lobby and online. "You think you're so clever. You think you can game the system. You believe you can just walk in here and fool us all with your cheap clothes and your fake documents." He held the check over the machine's hungry maw. "Don't you dare destroy that check." Elias's voice, for the first time, was sharp, cold, and laced with a terrifying command. But Marcus was too far gone, high on his own power. "Watch me," he sneered, and he let it go. The sound was obscene, a high-pitched, grinding shriek as the machine's teeth bit into the paper, tearing and ripping. Grrr, rip! The sound of $4.7 million being transformed into worthless confetti. The strips of paper, thin and white, rained down into the collection bin, a blizzard of destroyed potential. Each fragment caught the light from the crystal chandeliers as it settled into anonymous oblivion. Isabella's live stream was now a viral phenomenon. Over 8,000 people were watching. The comments flew across her screen in an unreadable torrent. "OMG, is this for real? That manager is a hero! This seems super racist, though. Call the cops on that guy. Why not just verify it first? This is messed up." Elias watched the murder of his check with the profound stillness of a man observing a hurricane from the eye of the storm. His hands, hanging at his sides, were now clenched into fists so tight his knuckles were white. A thin sheen of sweat had appeared on his brow, the only outward sign of the inferno raging within him. The shredder whined down into silence. "You know," Elias said, his voice quiet, yet somehow cutting through the shocked hush of the lobby. "This kind of treatment, it's a policy, a disease. I wonder if you have any idea at all who you're really dealing with." Marcus switched off the machine and turned back, his face glowing with a smile of pure, unadulterated triumph. "Oh, I know exactly what kind of person I'm dealing with, Mr. Vance," he said with venomous satisfaction, "and I know exactly how to handle trash like you." Elias glanced at his watch again. 2:55 p.m. 5 minutes. The stage was set. The audience was watching. The final act was about to begin. Marcus Thorne, having immolated the $4.7 million check, turned from the shredder to face Elias Vance. His posture was that of a conquering general. His chest was puffed out, his chin held high, radiating the absolute confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable, the sole arbiter of right and wrong within his marble kingdom. His finger, trembling slightly with adrenaline, shot out and pointed toward the brass exit doors. "I am calling LAPD if you are not out of this building in the next 10 seconds, Marcus announced, his voice ringing with the authority of someone who had never been disobeyed in his life. "This bank has a zero-tolerance policy for fraud, and I will not have you loitering here and intimidating our legitimate customers." Elias remained perfectly still, a silent statue in the eye of Marcus's hurricane. With a deliberate, almost maddeningly slow calm, he pulled out his iPhone. Marcus's eyes narrowed, assuming he was calling for backup, or perhaps a lawyer. But Elias's thumb moved with practiced ease across the screen. "Is the board meeting still on schedule for 3? He said into the phone, his voice clear and professional, easily audible to those standing nearby, and, more importantly, to the thousands watching Isabella's live stream. "Excellent. I'm just finishing up some business on the main floor. I'll be up in 5. Marcus's brow furrowed in confusion. Board meeting? What was this nonsense? It was a bluff, another pathetic attempt to intimidate him. He was too deep into his performance, too committed to his righteous crusade, to let this bizarre non sequitur derail his momentum. The situation was now spiraling into a full-blown media event, thanks to Isabella. She adjusted her phone's angle, ensuring she had a perfect shot of both Marcus and Elias. She had become the director of this drama, and she began narrating for her rapidly growing audience. "Manager Thorne is handling this with such professionalism," she said into her camera, her voice filled with the breathless excitement of a field reporter on the front lines. "You have to be strong in these situations. These people, they come in and they try to pull scams like this all the time. They think they can intimidate us with fake money and empty threats." Her Instagram live viewer count had surged past 15,000. The comments were becoming a war zone of opposing viewpoints. Supporters cheered her on. "You go, girl! Protect the bank! So brave! Good job staying strong!" While a growing chorus of critics voiced their disgust. "This is 100% racial profiling. OMG, I hope she gets fired, too. Someone needs to investigate this whole bank." Elias ended his call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He looked directly at Marcus, his gaze level and unblinking. "As I was saying, I am simply trying to conduct normal banking business," he stated, his tone remaining infuriatingly steady, despite the toxic hostility being poured on him. "Normal?" Marcus let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "There is nothing normal about this situation. You walk in here dressed like—" He gestured with undisguised disgust at Elias's hoodie and jeans. "Like that. You present a check that is so obviously fraudulent it's insulting. And now you're making these cryptic, threatening phone calls? You think you can scare me?" The crowd in the lobby was now visibly divided. Several older, well-dressed white customers were nodding along with Marcus, their faces alight with the grim satisfaction of watching someone put a troublemaker in his place. They saw Marcus as the defender of their ordered world, but others were shifting uncomfortably. An elderly black woman standing near the customer service desk was slowly shaking her head, her expression one of weary, painful recognition. A young man in a business suit had stopped filming and was now typing furiously on his phone, sharing the live stream link to his LinkedIn and Twitter profiles with the caption, "Unbelievable discrimination happening at Sterling Trust Bank, LA. You need to see this." Marcus stepped closer to Elias, invading his personal space. He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial growl, but kept it loud enough for Isabella's phone to capture every venomous word. "Let me make something crystal clear to you, Mr. Vance. After this, I'm personally putting you on the national blacklist. You won't be able to open a savings account at a community credit union, let alone a real bank. This kind of stunt has consequences." Isabella, ever the diligent documentarian, dutifully added new hashtags to her stream. Wancho Bank Security. Fraud Prevention. Protect our community. Her viewer count exploded past 20,000. The video was being screen recorded and shared across every platform imaginable. Then, the final, decisive move. Elias, without another word, turned away from the teller window. But he didn't walk toward the exit. Instead, he moved with quiet, deliberate purpose toward a discreet, unmarked alcove at the far end of the lobby. It was an area marked only by a small, polished brass sign that read, in elegant serif font, "Executive Floor Access Only." Marcus was so engrossed in playing to Isabella's camera that he didn't notice at first. "This is exactly why we have such stringent security protocols," he was pontificating to the live stream audience. "To protect our honest, hard-working customers from predators who think they can just—" He stopped mid-sentence. He turned, following the gaze of the crowd, and saw Elias. He was standing in front of the private VIP elevators, reaching into his wallet. A cold dread, the first prickle of doubt, began to creep up Marcus's spine. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Marcus bellowed, his voice cracking. He abandoned all pretense of professional decorum and began running, his expensive leather shoes slipping precariously on the polished marble floor. "That is a restricted area. Nobody gave you permission to go up there." But Elias had already retrieved a simple, unmarked black card from his wallet. He swiped it. A small LED light on the panel flashed from red to green. A soft, melodic chime echoed in the silent lobby. The brass elevator doors slid open with a whisper. Marcus reached the elevator bank, panting, just as Elias stepped inside. He lunged forward, but the doors were already closing. Through the shrinking gap, Elias made eye contact with Marcus one last time. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his eyes. A deep, ancient calm that looked terrifyingly like pity. The wall clock above the teller stations, a grand old thing with Roman numerals, showed the minute hand clicking precisely to the top of the hour. It was exactly 3 p.m. The elevator doors sealed shut with a soft thud. And then the car was gone, carrying Elias Vance upward to floors that Marcus Thorne had only ever dreamed of seeing, toward a meeting that was about to change everything. For a moment, there was only the sound of Marcus's ragged breathing. Then, the bank's public address system crackled to life. An electronic chime, crisp and clean, echoed through the lobby, followed by a calm, professional, and utterly neutral female voice. It was the kind of automated voice that delivered everything from fire drill instructions to quarterly earnings reports. "The 3 o'clock meeting of the Board of Directors will now come to order. Chairman Elias Vance, presiding." The words dropped into the lobby like a bomb. They seemed to hang in the air, each syllable echoing off the marble and crystal, refusing to dissipate. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, the massive space was as silent as a tomb. No whispers, no footsteps, no electronic beeps. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to have paused in mechanical shock. Marcus Thorne stood frozen in front of the VIP elevator, his face a glitching computer screen of cascading emotions. First, blank confusion. Then, utter disbelief. Then, a wave of dawning, sickening horror that started in his eyes and spread across his features like a tidal wave of ice water. His jaw hung open, his face slack. Isabella's phone trembled violently in her hand, but she somehow managed to keep the live stream running. Her viewer count had detonated, soaring past 40,000 people. Comments flooded in so fast they were an incomprehensible blur of text. Wait, what? Did it just say chairman? OMG, this is insane. Is this a prank? This has to be a prank. From the executive floors high above, a new voice flowed through the building's audio system. This time, it wasn't an automated announcement. It was Elias Vance. But this was not the quiet, deferential voice from the teller window. This was the voice of absolute power. Calm, resonant, certain, and utterly unshakable. Good afternoon. This is Elias Vance. I am the chairman and controlling shareholder of Sterling Trust Bank. I currently hold 67% of this institution's voting stock. As if on cue, the main bank of elevators came alive. Cars began descending from the executive floors. The doors of the first one opened to reveal the bank's most senior leadership. Vice President of Operations, Margaret Wong, in her signature navy blue Armani suit. Chief Financial Officer David Rodriguez, his silver hair impeccably styled. Chief Legal Counsel Patricia Hamilton, carrying the thick leather portfolio that was her constant companion. They stepped out, saw Marcus standing rigid with shock, and then turned as one toward the VIP elevator as it began its descent. The doors slid open, and Elias Vance stepped out. The executive team moved to him as if drawn by a magnetic force, their voices projecting across the silent lobby. Good afternoon, Chairman Vance, Margaret Wong said, her tone a perfect blend of professional respect and genuine warmth. The boardroom is prepared for your presentation. Sir, David Rodriguez added, we have the quarterly customer service audit reports you requested, ready for your immediate review. Isabella's live stream was now being watched by over 50,000 people. The comments were a tsunami of pure, unadulterated shock. He owns the whole damn bank. Holy soireer. That manager is so unemployed. This is the greatest thing I have ever seen on the internet. Someone screen record this right now. Marcus Thorne, the man who had been a god in this lobby just minutes before, now looked like a ghost. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. His expensive suit was now soaked with sweat at the collar and under the arms. He looked small, pathetic, and utterly broken. The customers in the lobby finally understood the magnitude of what they were witnessing. Phones that had been recording casually were now held aloft with intense, unwavering focus. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. This was history. Elias Vance stood before the executive team. He was still wearing the same faded black hoodie and worn-out Levi's, but his entire being had transformed. The way he stood, the way he held his shoulders, the way his eyes swept across the lobby. It all radiated the quiet, immense authority of a man who had built an empire from nothing and was now about to clean house. The meeting can wait a few minutes, Elias told his senior staff, his voice carrying easily across the marble expanse. I have some urgent business to address down here first. The executive team nodded in unison and formed a respectful semicircle behind him. Their presence alone, standing behind the man in the hoodie, was a visual thunderclap. It transformed the lobby from a banking hall into a courtroom, and judgment was about to be rendered. Isabella's finger hovered over the End Live button, her survival instincts screaming at her to stop broadcasting. But she couldn't. She was no longer just documenting a scene. She was capturing the most spectacular reversal of fortune ever caught on social media. The silence stretched for one more heartbeat, then another, and then Chairman Elias Vance began to speak. Elias Vance advanced into the center of the lobby, his executive team parting before him and reforming behind him like a Praetorian guard. Each step he took on the marble floor seemed to echo with the weight of 20 years of ambition and discipline. The vast, cavernous banking hall, which had felt so imposing moments before, now seemed to shrink, contracting around his singular presence. Marcus Thorne remained paralyzed in the middle of the floor, a statue of pure terror. Sweat was now visibly dripping from his forehead and tracing paths down his temples. His Xenia suit, which had once been a suit of armor, now looked like a cheap costume on a man who had forgotten all his lines. His breathing was a series of shallow, ragged gasps, the frantic panting of a cornered animal. "Marcus Thorne," Elias said. His voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a resonant authority that filled the entire space, a judge delivering a verdict. Each word was perfectly articulated, and the lobby's acoustics carried them to every corner, to every phone camera, to every pair of stunned ears. "You are terminated, effective immediately." The words were clean, sharp, and brutal. "Your employment with Sterling Trust Bank is over. The reasons for your termination are gross misconduct, willful destruction of a client's property, and a complete and catastrophic violation of this institution's core values of respect and integrity." I didn't know," Marcus stammered, the words tumbling out of his mouth, useless and pathetic. His voice cracked like a pubescent boy's. "Sir, I swear, I was trying to protect the bank from what I thought was—" "Stop talking," Elias commanded. The words were not a request. They were a firewall. Marcus's mouth snapped shut with an audible click, as if his jaw were controlled by a remote switch. "Security," Elias said, his voice level. Two men in dark, impeccably tailored suits materialized from the periphery. They had been discreetly positioned near the entrance, waiting for the signal. They were not the bank's usual uniformed guards. They were members of the Executive Protection Detail. Their bearing was that of federal agents, not mall cops. They were serious men for serious situations. "Escort Mr. Thorne from the building," Elias instructed, his gaze fixed on Marcus. "He is no longer an employee here. His access has been revoked. He is not welcome on bank property ever again." Isabella's live stream was now approaching 75,000 concurrent viewers. She was struggling to keep her phone steady as she captured Marcus's complete disintegration. The comments were a waterfall of digital schadenfreude, a blur of amazement, outrage, celebration, and disbelief. "Furthermore," Elias announced, his voice now addressing the entire lobby and, by extension, the tens of thousands watching online. "As a condition of his severance, which I am not legally obligated to provide, but will, Mr. Thorne will be required to complete 200 hours of community service. This service will be with organizations that directly support and uplift minority and underprivileged communities in Los Angeles." A murmur went through the crowd. This wasn't just a firing. This was a lesson. He will also be required to participate in and complete a 3-month intensive diversity, equity, and inclusion training program. At his own expense, these conditions are not negotiable. As the two security officers flanked Marcus, each taking an arm, he seemed to crumble. He turned back toward Elias, his face a desperate, pleading ruin. "Please, sir, please, I have a family, I have a mortgage. I was just doing what I thought was right, what I was trained to do." Elias studied him for a long, silent moment, letting the man's pathetic excuses hang in the air. "Mr. Thorne, he finally replied, his voice cold and clear as glacial ice. What you did today had nothing to do with protecting this bank. It had everything to do with the ugly, prejudiced assumptions you made based on my skin color and my clothes. That isn't banking policy, that's bigotry, and it has no home here. The security team began to escort Marcus toward the brass revolving doors. His legs seemed to have lost their strength, and he stumbled, held up only by the firm grip of the men on either side of him. A gauntlet of smartphones tracked his every move, the lenses capturing the walk of shame, documenting every agonizing step of his spectacular fall from grace. Furthermore, Elias continued, turning his attention back to the assembled crowd of customers and employees, Sterling Trust Bank will be instituting an immediate and comprehensive overhaul of our customer service protocols from the top down. Every single employee, from the newest teller to the most senior vice president, will participate in a mandatory new training program focused on respectful service, unconscious bias recognition, and equitable treatment for all. He then turned his gaze slowly, deliberately, until it landed on Isabella Rossi. She was still live streaming, but her face was now ashen with terror. Her perfect blonde hair was disheveled, and her makeup couldn't hide the raw fear in her eyes. "Isabella Rossi," Elias said, and she flinched as if he had struck her. She lowered the phone, her hand shaking. "Sir, I'm so sorry, You will be the first person enrolled in this new training program," Elias stated, his voice firm, but not unkind. "You will also be on probation for the next 6 months. Consider this your one and only opportunity to unlearn the behavior you displayed today and become the kind of employee this bank needs and our customers deserve." Isabella nodded frantically, tears welling in her eyes, unable to speak. The live stream comments erupted with speculation about whether she would or should keep her job. The brass doors completed their slow, indifferent rotation as Marcus Thorne was expelled into the afternoon sunlight, disappearing from view. He left behind only the ghost of his arrogance, the confetti of the shredded check, and the dozens of viral videos that would make him infamous before he even reached the curb. The lobby, which had been paralyzed with tension, began to buzz with hushed conversations. Customers and employees were processing the tectonic shift they had just witnessed. Several people approached Elias, their expressions a mixture of respect and awe. Others gathered in small groups, their phones still out, uploading their own footage and sharing their first-hand accounts of corporate justice delivered live and in real time. Elias stood in the center of it all, still a paradox in his hoodie and jeans, but now seen by everyone for exactly what he had always been. A leader who had just delivered a master class in the idea that dignity is not negotiable and respect is not determined by a dress code. Then he took a step forward, toward Isabella's still trembling phone. He knew the live stream was over, but he also knew every other camera in the room was now pointed at him. He had their attention. The lobby, the city, the world. And he had something to say. Elias Vance positioned himself in the center of the lobby, directly facing the sea of smartphones that were now all trained on him. He knew that Isabella's initial stream had ended, but it didn't matter. He was now broadcasting on 100 different channels, his message destined to be clipped, shared, and replayed millions of times. He took a deep breath, not of fatigue, but of purpose. He spoke with the measured cadence of a man addressing a global shareholder meeting, but his message was deeply personal, directed at every person watching. "Prejudice," he began, his voice resonating with the quiet power of lived experience, "is a disease. It still exists in our society, in our cities, in the very foundations of institutions like this one." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle into the minds of his listeners. Around the lobby, every customer and employee stood in rapt, respectful silence. They knew they were witnessing something far more important than the firing of a bank manager. "It often hides," Elias continued. "It hides behind professional smiles, behind the convenient interpretation of company policies, and behind the split-second corrosive judgments we make about people based on how they look, instead of who they are." Behind him, Margaret Wong and the other executives stood in silent solidarity. Margaret's expression was one of profound pride, mixed with the sad acknowledgement of the truth Elias was speaking. She had worked alongside him for years, had witnessed his brilliant business acumen, but seeing him navigate this moment of public humiliation with such grace and transform it into a teachable moment. This was the essence of his leadership. "Human dignity," Elias declared, his eyes finding a camera lens and locking onto it, as if speaking directly to each individual viewer, "should not be contingent on the brand of your suit or the color of your skin. Every single person who walks through these doors, or any doors, regardless of how they are dressed, what language they speak, what they look like, or how much money they have in their account, deserves to be treated with a baseline of fundamental respect," a voice called out from the back of the lobby. It was the elderly black woman who had been watching the entire confrontation unfold. "Thank you, son," she said, her voice clear and strong. "Thank you for standing up and showing them who you really are." Elias met her gaze and gave her a nod of genuine gratitude and acknowledgement. "I want to thank everyone who witnessed what happened here today," he went on, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Especially those of you who felt that knot in your stomach, who felt uncomfortable with how I was being treated. Do not ignore that feeling. That discomfort you felt? That was your conscience. That was your humanity telling you that something was deeply wrong. In the future, I want to implore you to trust that feeling. Act on it." He turned slightly to address Isabella directly, though he kept his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "And thank you, Isabella, for documenting this entire interaction. Unwittingly, you have provided this company with its most powerful training tool. Your video, and the videos everyone else has taken, will become a permanent part of our training curriculum, a stark and vital reminder of what we must never allow to happen again." Isabella, still holding her phone, was now openly crying, but her expression was changing from one of fear to one of dawning, painful self-reflection. She nodded, understanding the strange, terrible gift she had just been given. "This is not about revenge or punishment," Elias emphasized, his tone softening, becoming more conversational. "Firing one man doesn't solve the problem. This is about building better systems. It's about rewriting the code. We need to create systems that see people as individuals, not as stereotypes. Systems that are designed to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, rather than assuming the worst." A young man in the crowd, the one who had been sharing the stream online, tentatively raised his hand. "Sir, what can people like us do when we see this kind of thing happening?" Elias offered him the first genuinely warm smile he had shown all day. "Speak up," he said simply. "Use your voice. Use your phone, just like Isabella did, but use it to defend the person being wronged, not to sensationalize their humiliation. Record injustice. Bear witness. The silence of good people is the soil in which prejudice grows. Your voice is the antidote," he concluded, bringing his message home. Real, lasting change begins when each of us has the courage to look in the mirror and examine our own biases, our own comfortable assumptions. It requires the courage to do what is right, even when it's awkward, even when it's uncomfortable, and especially when it challenges the systems we have accepted as normal for far too long. The lobby was no longer a bank. It had been transformed into a classroom, a town hall, a place of reckoning, and the lesson in leadership, dignity, and social justice was being taught, improbably, by a man in a hoodie who just happened to own the building. Elias took another step forward, closing the distance to the nearest camera. He knew millions would now see this. The story was already a wildfire on social media. His presence was commanding, his eyes direct and piercing, creating an intimate connection with every viewer. He was speaking to them, and for them. "I want to speak directly to everyone watching this right now," he began, his voice imbued with the moral authority he had just so powerfully demonstrated. "Never, ever judge another human being by their appearance. Do not let stereotypes and lazy assumptions blind you to the truth of the person standing right in front of you." He let that sink in, allowing viewers to process not just what they had witnessed, but to reflect on their own lives, their own potential for prejudice. And when you witness injustice, whether it's subtle or overt, whether it's in your workplace, on the street, or at your own dinner table, find your voice. Say something. Do something. The bystander who feels uncomfortable but stays silent is an accomplice. Your silence is a vote for the status quo. The comment sections on the newly uploaded videos had become global forums, with people from around the world sharing their own painful experiences of being judged and dismissed. There were messages in dozens of languages, testimonials, apologies, and promises to be better, to be braver. If this story moved you, if you believe in what we've talked about here today, then share this video, Elias urged, his voice rising with passion. Don't just share it for the drama. Share it as a reminder that each of us has the power and the responsibility to create positive change. Let it be a lesson that character is more important than costume. He glanced around the banking lobby one last time, at the faces of the customers and employees, forever bonded by the events of the last hour. Remember that respect is not something you earn by wearing an expensive watch or driving a luxury car, he said, his voice thundering with the conviction of a man who had built his life on this principle. Respect is something every human being deserves, simply by virtue of being human. It is the default setting. It is the price of admission to a decent society. Then Elias smiled. It wasn't the polite, professional mask of a corporate executive. It was a genuine, knowing, and slightly mischievous smile of a man who had just played a checkmate that would be studied for years. "And finally," he said, his eyes twinkling with a well-earned hint of satisfaction, "always remember that you never, ever know who you're really talking to. The person you're dismissing, disrespecting, or discriminating against today might just be the person who owns the damn building. They might just be the person who has the power to change your entire world tomorrow." Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because our work here is just getting started. With that, he gave a final nod to the cameras. The viral moment was over, but the movement was just beginning. Within minutes, the clips were everywhere, branded with hashtags, "Jewish Justice for Elias," "Kto Sterling Trust Reckoning," "Ktot Check Your Prejudice," "Ktot Banking While Black." The videos would be viewed hundreds of millions of times, translated, analyzed on news networks, and dissected in business school case studies on leadership, branding, and corporate social responsibility. Elias Vance, still in his black hoodie and faded jeans, turned and walked back toward the VIP elevator to finally rejoin his board meeting. But he was no longer just a CEO returning to his duties. He had become a symbol of grace under fire, of the quiet strength that comes from holding fast to one's principles, and of the profound, system-altering change that is possible when someone with power chooses to wield it for justice instead of for vengeance. The brass elevator doors closed behind him, but the impact of his 30 minutes in the lobby would continue to ripple outward for years to come. Marcus Thorne's career was a casualty, but Elias Vance's legacy as a leader who chose education over annihilation had just been cemented. And in classrooms and conference rooms across the country, a new question would be added to ethics training. How do you treat people when you think no one important is watching? And how might your answer change if you understood that in the modern world, someone is always watching?